Hello, I'm Mike Santiago, and welcome to Borderless Dreams. Every week we share extraordinary stories of people who crossed borders, not just geographical ones, but borders of fear, doubt, and impossibility. These are real people who faced unimaginable challenges and refused to give up on their dreams. Today's story takes us from Damascus, Syria, to Berlin, Germany. It's about a woman who lost her father, her home, and her country to war, who crossed the Mediterranean Sea in an overcrowded boat, who slept in a refugee camp with nothing but a backpack and her grandmother's recipe book, and who, against all odds, built one of Berlin's most celebrated restaurants. This is the story of Rawan Alkurd. Let's begin.
In the heart of Berlin, there's a restaurant that serves more than just food. It serves hope. Behind the kitchen door is a woman who lost everything twice. Her name is Rawan Alkurd. 10 years ago, she was sleeping in a refugee camp. She had nothing but a backpack and a recipe book. Today, she owns one of Berlin's most celebrated restaurants. She employs 15 people. She's cooked for world leaders. But the journey? It began with 300 euros. And zero hope. Rawan fled war, crossed borders, and faced rejection after rejection. But she refused to stop dreaming. Every dish she serves carries the flavors of her past, and the courage that brought her here. From a refugee camp to a restaurant empire, this is the story of resilience and the power of never giving up. Damascus, Syria, spring 2009. Before the world knew it as a war zone, it was simply home. Before the war, Damascus was a beautiful city, with bustling souks, quirky ancient architecture, and families in cafes in the old city. Stone streets that bore witness to 5,000 years of history. Markets filled with the aroma of cardamom, za'atar, and fresh bread. Children playing in the courtyards. Families gathering for Friday meals. Life pulsated in Damascus, full of color, joy, and stories. This was Rawan Alkurd's world. Rawan grew up in a modest apartment in the Babtuma neighborhood. Her father, Khalid, owned a small textile shop that had been in the family for 2 generations. Her mother, Layla, taught mathematics at a local school. Her younger brother, Omar, was studying engineering at Damascus University. They weren't wealthy, but they had everything that mattered: stability, safety, and dreams for the future. Rawan's dream was simple and impossible. She wanted to be a chef. In Syria, in a traditional family, this wasn't just unusual, it was unthinkable. When I told my father I wanted to go to culinary school, Rawan would later recall, he looked at me like I had suggested becoming an astronaut. In his world, respectable women became doctors, teachers, or engineers. Cooking was something you did at home for your family, not as a profession. But Rawan had been in love with cooking since she was 6 years old. Every Friday, she would wake before dawn to help her grandmother, Fatima, prepare the family meal. This wasn't just cooking. It was a sacred ritual. Her grandmother taught her everything: how to knead dough until it felt like silk, how to roast eggplant over an open flame until the skin blistered perfectly, how to balance the tartness of pomegranate molasses with the sweetness of honey in a glaze. But most importantly, her grandmother taught her that food was more than sustenance. Food is memory, her grandmother would say, stirring a pot of miadara. When you cook with your hands and your heart, you're not just feeding bodies, you're feeding souls. You're keeping our ancestors alive. Rawan never forgot those words.
For 3 years, Rawan pleaded with her parents. She showed them articles about famous chefs. She cooked elaborate meals to prove her skills. She argued, negotiated, and refused to give up. Finally, on her 22nd birthday, her father made a deal. 1 year, he said. You can attend culinary school for 1 year. If you're serious, if you prove yourself, we'll support you. But if you lose interest, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Rawan enrolled in the Damascus Culinary Institute in September 2010. She was one of only 3 women in a class of 40 students. The male students mocked her. The instructors doubted her. But Rawan worked harder than anyone. She stayed late perfecting her knife skills. She studied cookbooks like they were sacred texts. She experimented with traditional recipes, adding her own creative touches while respecting the foundations her grandmother had taught her. By the end of her first year, she had earned the respect of her classmates and the praise of her instructors. Her father, watching his daughter's passion and dedication, finally understood. "You have your grandmother's gift," he told her one evening, tears in his eyes. "I was wrong to doubt you." Rawan began her second year of culinary school in September 2010. She dreamed of opening her own small restaurant in Damascus one day, maybe in the old city, something intimate and authentic. She had no idea she had less than 6 months before everything would change forever.
The crisis. When war came. The 15th of March, 2011, the Syrian civil war began. What started as peaceful demonstrations in the southern city of Daraa quickly spread across the country. Damascus, for centuries a city of coexistence and culture, became a battlefield. At first, the Alkurd family tried to maintain normalcy. They told themselves it would pass. Conflicts always passed. But this one didn't. April 2011, Rawan's culinary school closed indefinitely. The streets became too dangerous for classes. May 2011, her father's textile shop was looted. 20 years of work, gone in one night. June 2011, explosions became background noise. The sound of home. The Alkurd family moved 3 times in 18 months. Each time to a safer neighborhood. Each time, the war followed them. By 2012, Damascus had transformed into something unrecognizable. Streets where children once played were now empty. Markets that had bustled with life were silent. Families huddled in their homes, listening to the sounds of violence outside, praying they would survive another night. Rawan's mother lost her teaching job when her school was bombed. Omar dropped out of university because it was too dangerous to attend classes. The family's savings dwindled. Food became scarce. But they stayed, because Syria was home, because leaving felt like betraying everything they loved, because they kept hoping, desperately, that somehow things would get better. And then came the 21st of August 2013, the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening. Rawan's father had managed to find fresh vegetables at a market across town, a rare treasure. The family was together, preparing dinner. For a few hours, they felt almost normal. At 9:47 p.m., they heard the sound, the whistling, the terrible whistling that every Syrian learned to recognize. It was a deafening sound, and one that would change their lives forever. Rawan's father looked up from the onions he was chopping. "Get down!" he shouted. "Everyone down!" But there wasn't time. The missile struck the building's 4th floor. The Alkurds lived on the 3rd. The explosion was deafening. The ceiling collapsed. Dust and debris filled the air. Rawan couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't hear anything except ringing. Rawan is frantically pulled by her mother and brother through the hallway of the building, which is burning from the bomb blast. They smell death and are desperate to get out of the building. When the dust began to settle, Rawan realized something was wrong. Someone was missing. "Baba!" she screamed. "Baba!" Her father, Khalid Alkurd, didn't make it out of the kitchen. He was 50, 3 years old. In one instant, Rawan lost her father, her home, and her sense of safety. She was 24 years old. They had to leave the building due to the risk of falling debris. There was no time to properly grieve. There was no time to process the events. Rawan, her mother, and Omar moved to a distant cousin's apartment on the outskirts of Damascus. 12 people crammed into 3 rooms. No privacy, no space to grieve. For 2 weeks, Rawan barely spoke. She stared at the walls. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep without seeing her father's face. She wanted to scream. And then one morning, her mother sat beside her and said the words that would change their lives again. "We have to leave Syria." Rawan looked at her mother in disbelief. "This is our home," she whispered, her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Your father is gone. Our home is destroyed. This war isn't ending. If we stay, we will die here. And your father didn't die so that we could give up." It was the hardest decision any of them had ever made. But they knew she was right. They would leave Syria. They would become refugees. They had no idea where they were going. No idea if they would survive the journey. No idea if they would ever see home again. But they packed what they could carry. Documents, a few clothes, some photos, and one weathered handwritten recipe book that had belonged to Rawan's grandmother. "Why are you bringing that?" Omar asked. Rawan held the book to her chest. "Because it's all we have left of who we were." Through Hell to Hope. September 2013. The Alkurd family began the journey that millions of Syrians would make. The journey that would test every ounce of strength they had left. The route was already well known. Overland from Syria to the Turkish border. Then, by boat to Greece. And then, somehow, reach Northern Europe. Easy to say. Impossible to do. Step 1. Leaving Syria. This alone was deadly. They paid a smuggler $5,000, nearly all their remaining savings, to drive them to the Turkish border in a hidden compartment of a truck. 22 people crammed into a space designed for cargo. No windows, no ventilation, for 14 hours. Rawan remembered struggling to breathe, her mother squeezing her hand in the darkness, a baby crying somewhere nearby, the truck stopping at checkpoints, the terror of thinking, "This is it. We're going to be discovered." But they made it across. Turkey, the 19th of September 2013. They spent 3 weeks in a smuggler's safe house in Izmir, waiting for their turn to cross the sea. The house was overcrowded, unsanitary, and expensive. The smugglers charged them for everything: food, water, even blankets. Every day they heard stories: boats that capsized, families that drowned, children lost at sea. "We should go back," Omar said one night. "This is insane. We're going to die." But their mother shook her head. "There's nothing to go back to." The 8th of October, 2013, 11 p.m. The smuggler came to the safe house. "Tonight. Be ready in 10 minutes." They were driven to a remote beach. No lights, no sounds except the waves. In the darkness, Rawan could see the boat. Or rather, what they were calling a boat. It was a rubber dinghy, designed maybe for 20 people on a calm lake. There were 47 people boarding it that night. Families with young children, elderly grandparents, young men traveling alone. All of them desperate. All of them terrified. The smuggler gave brief instructions. "Someone will pick you up on the other side. If the boat starts taking water, use these." He tossed a few plastic cups into the boat. "Good luck." And then he was gone. For the first hour, the sea was calm. The boat's small motor sputtered but kept going. People huddled together, silent, praying. Rawan put his arm around his mother for comfort and looked up at the stars, out at the darkness of the high seas. The same stars he used to see from his grandmother's balcony in Damascus. The same stars she used to see from her grandmother's balcony in Damascus. She thought, "How did we end up here? How did our lives become this?" Then, 2 hours into the journey, the motor began to fail. It coughed, sputtered, died. Someone tried to restart it. It wouldn't catch. Panic spread through the boat. Then someone screamed, "Water! There's water coming in!" The bottom of the boat was leaking, slowly at first, then faster. People began bailing water with the plastic cups, with their hands, with anything they could find. Children were crying. Adults were shouting. Someone was praying loudly in Arabic. Rawan looked at her mother. Her mother looked back. Neither of them said it, but they both thought it. "This is how we die. We survived war only to drown in the Mediterranean." Rawan reached into her backpack and pulled out her grandmother's recipe book. She held it against her chest. "I'm sorry, Teta," she whispered. "I tried." And then, through the darkness, they saw lights. A large boat. A rescue ship from the Greek Coast Guard. They had been spotted. The Coast Guard pulled them aboard one by one. Wet, shaking, some crying with relief, others too shocked to react. Rawan collapsed on the deck, clutching her recipe book. It was soaked. Some of the ink had run, but it had survived. They had survived. Le 9 octobre 2013. Dawn, Lesvos, Greece. The Alkurd family had made it to Europe. They were alive. But the journey was far from over. The camp, waiting in limbo. The Moria refugee camp on the island of Lesbos was meant to process refugees quickly, register them, verify their identities, send them onward. But by October 2013, the camp was overwhelmed. What was designed for hundreds now held thousands. The Alkurd family was assigned to a large tent shared with 3 other families. 11 people total. No walls, no privacy. Just thin fabric separating one family's trauma from another's. The days blurred together. Wake up. Stand in line for food. Stand in line for water. Stand in line to use the bathroom. Wait, wait, wait. There was nothing to do but wait. Rawan watched her mother, aged 10 years and 10 days. The light in her eyes had dimmed. She barely spoke. She barely ate. Omar grew angry. He paced the camp. He argued with officials. He punched a tent pole so hard he broke 2 fingers. And Rawan? She felt nothing. Empty. Like a part of her had died in that boat. Until the day she noticed the camp kitchen. It was week 3. Dinner had been the same as always. Bland rice, canned beans, stale bread. Rawan stared at her plate and thought of her grandmother. Thought of Friday dinners. Thought of food that tasted like love. She stood up, walked to the kitchen tent, and asked the volunteers, "Can I help?" The volunteer, a Greek woman named Maria, looked surprised. "You want to cook? I was studying to be a chef," Rawan said. "Before the war," Maria smiled. "Then yes, please. We could use all the help we can get." The next day, Rawan entered the kitchen. She looked at the ingredients available. Chickpeas, olive oil, garlic, lemons, tahini, cumin. Limited, but enough. She began to cook. Not just food, but memory, identity, home. She made hummus. Real, authentic Syrian hummus. Smooth as silk, tangy, rich, perfect. Word spread through the camp faster than wildfire. That evening, over 100 refugees lined up outside the kitchen. Syrians, Afghans, Iraqis, Eritreans. Each one took a small plate of hummus, and each one, for just a moment, was transported home. Rawan saw a Syrian woman in her 70s taste the hummus and burst into tears. "My mother used to make it exactly like this," she sobbed. An Iraqi man closed his eyes, savoring every bite. "I haven't tasted anything this good in 2 years," he said. A young Afghan girl, maybe 7 years old, smiled for the first time in weeks. And Rawan realized something profound. She had lost her home, her father, her dreams, everything. But she still had this, the ability to bring comfort, to create moments of joy, to feed souls, not just bodies, just like her grandmother had taught her. For the next 3 weeks, Rawan cooked in that camp kitchen every single day. She made dishes that reminded people of home. She listened to their stories. She cried with them. She laughed with them. And slowly, the light began to return to her mother's eyes. Omar stopped pacing. The emptiness inside Rawan began to fill with something new. Purpose. The long road to belonging. The 12th of November 2013. Berlin, Germany. The Alkurd family arrived in Berlin on a freezing winter morning. They were directed to a refugee processing center, given temporary papers, and assigned to emergency housing, a converted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. 300 refugees, bunk beds separated by thin curtains, communal bathrooms, constant noise. This was their new home. Germany had opened its doors to refugees, but opening doors and offering belonging are 2 very different things. Rawan applied for asylum and was told the process could take 18 months, maybe longer. During that time, she was not allowed to work legally. She couldn't attend school. She couldn't leave the city without permission. She could only wait. Again, the German language was impossible. The weather was brutal. The culture was foreign. Everything felt wrong. In Damascus, Rawan had been a culinary student with dreams and a future. Here, she was a case number, a statistic, a problem to be processed. By January 2014, Rawan had stopped getting out of bed. Depression had fully set in. She stared at the ceiling for hours. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't see any future worth fighting for. One morning, her mother sat on the edge of her bunk and said quietly, "Your father didn't survive the war so you could die like this." Rawan looked at her mother. "I have nothing left, Mama. No degree, no job, no home. What am I supposed to do?" Her mother reached under the bunk and pulled out the old recipe book. Stained, worn, but intact. "You have this. You have your hands. You have your grandmother's legacy. That is not nothing." Something in Rawan stirred. A small spark. Not much, but enough. The next day, she started cooking again. In the warehouse's shared kitchen, a cramped, poorly equipped space used by hundreds, Rawan began making Syrian meals. Just for herself and her family at first, then for a few other Syrian refugees who smelled the food and asked if they could buy a plate. Rawan charged just €5, enough to buy more ingredients. Word spread. Within 2 weeks, Rawan was cooking for 20 people a day. Then, something unexpected happened. A German woman named Petra, a social worker who visited the warehouse weekly, smelled Rawan's cooking. She followed the scent to the kitchen and found Rawan preparing maklube, an upside-down rice and vegetable dish. "What is that?" Petra asked. "It smells incredible." Rawan offered her a plate. Petra took one bite and closed her eyes. "This," she said, "is the best thing I've ever tasted." Petra ran a community center in the Kreuzberg neighborhood. She had an idea. "What if," she said, "you could cook a meal once a week at my center? We'd sell tickets to Germans who want to experience real Syrian food. You'd get to keep most of the money. Would you be interested?" Rawan stared at her. "You want me to cook? Professionally? Why not? You're clearly talented, and Berlin loves authentic food experiences." Rawan thought of her father, her grandmother, the recipe book. She thought, maybe this is why I survived. Maybe there's still a purpose. "Yes," she said, "I'll do it." March 2015. The first Supper Club Syria event. Petra's Community Center. 20 seats, 20 tickets at €30 each. The tickets sold out in 48 hours. Rawan was terrified. She had never cooked for strangers like this. What if they hated it? What if she failed? But when the guests arrived, something magical happened. Rawan served fattoush salad, crisp vegetables tossed with toasted pita and sumac. She served kibbeh, perfectly spiced ground lamb encased in bulgur. And she served her grandmother's mahamara, the walnut and red pepper dip that had been passed down for generations. The room fell silent. Not because the food was bad, but because it was so good no one wanted to talk. After dinner, a German woman in her 60s approached Rawan with tears in her eyes. "I traveled to Syria in the 1,980 seconds, she said. "Before the war, this food, it brought me back. Thank you for sharing your culture with us." A young German couple asked if they could book the next event for their friends. A food blogger asked if she could write about Rawan's story. And Rawan realized people didn't just want food. They wanted connection. They wanted to understand. They wanted to see refugees not as problems, but as people with gifts to share. By the end of 2015, Supper Club Syria was happening 3 times a week. Rawan was written up in German newspapers. Food bloggers came. TV crews filmed her cooking. She wasn't just serving food. She was building bridges, changing perceptions, showing Germany that refugees weren't just victims of tragedy. They were talented, skilled, creative people with something valuable to contribute. In early 2016, a group of German investors contacted Rawan. They had been following her story. They wanted to fund something bigger, a real restaurant. Rawan was terrified. She had never run a business. She barely spoke fluent German. She was still waiting for permanent residency, but she remembered her father's words. "If you don't take risks, you don't live." And she remembered her grandmother's legacy. "Yes," she said, "let's do it." The dream realized. Sham restaurant opens. September 2017. A warm evening in Berlin's Mitte district. The restaurant was called Sham, the ancient Arabic name for Damascus, a tribute to everything Rawan had lost and everything she had found. The space was small but beautiful. Warm lighting, Syrian art on the walls, tables set with care. And in the open kitchen, visible to all the guests, stood Rawan Alkurd, wearing chef whites, holding her grandmother's recipe book. The opening night was attended by over 200 people, refugees who had eaten at her supper clubs, Germans who had followed her journey, journalists, food critics, even a few local politicians, and in the corner, quietly crying tears of joy, sat Rawan's mother and brother. The menu was simple but perfect. Every dish told a story. The muhammara represented her grandmother, the kibbeh represented her father, the fatouche represented home. The dessert, a rosewater and pistachio cake, represented hope. The reviews came fast, and they were glowing. Not just a restaurant, one critic wrote, a love letter to a culture, a family, and a dream that refused to die. Within 6 months, Sham had a 6-week waiting list. Within a year, it was considered one of Berlin's must-visit restaurants. Food magazines wrote features. International travel guides included it. Angela Merkel herself came for dinner. But more importantly, Sham became a symbol. Rawan hired 15 employees. Half of them were refugees like herself. She mentored young refugee women who dreamed of becoming chefs. She used her platform to advocate for refugee rights. Sham wasn't just serving food, it was serving hope. Today, Rawan Alkurd is 35 years old. She has permanent residency in Germany. She's working towards citizenship. Her restaurant continues to thrive. She's published a cookbook. She gives talks at universities about resilience and entrepreneurship. But when you ask her about success, she always says the same thing. Success isn't about money or fame. Success is about purpose. It's about taking your pain and turning it into something that helps others. Rawan's journey from Damascus to Berlin wasn't easy. It wasn't quick, and it certainly wasn't guaranteed. She lost her father, her home, her country, everything. But she never lost the one thing that mattered most, the belief that her story wasn't over. I didn't just cross borders, Rawan says. I crossed fear. I crossed doubt. I crossed the belief that my life was defined by tragedy. And now, every time someone walks into Sham and tastes my grandmother's recipes, they're crossing borders too. The borders between cultures, between fear and understanding, between stranger and friend. That is the power of a borderless dream. And that is just the beginning.
What an incredible journey, isn't it? Rawan's story shows us that even when life takes everything from us, the human spirit can rebuild, reimagine, and triumph. And that's exactly what Borderless Dreams is all about. Sharing stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of our shared humanity. We bring you new stories every Sunday and Wednesday, each one as powerful and moving as Rawan's. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon. It truly helps us reach more people with these important stories. Leave a comment below and tell us, which moment in Rawan's story resonated most with you? I'm Mike Santiago, host of the Borderless Dreams channel, and I want to thank you for being here. See you next time.